Hello and welcome back. My name is Jennifer and today I will enchant stuff and show you how to make a leather-bound Slytherin spelltome. To create the pages, I'm going to use 200 GSM A4 size drawing paper. Preferably you would use the thinner sketchbook paper, but these were the only ones I had at hand. I'm first going to fold each page in half, and then I'm going to flatten each folded edge of each paper using the wooden part of my stitching awl. Next I'm going to cut the end papers with some black cardboard paper, and I used the cardboard from my drawing pad as a template. I will also fold these pieces in half and flatten the edge with my stitching awl. I also decided to cut the cardboard piece in half to use as parts of the book cover, but later on I realized that these were not going to work, and you will find out the reason why. To prepare the pages for stitching, I'm going to first clamp each page down and use the cardboard pieces and some leather, and then mark out where the stitching holes will be. Then I will use the stitching awl to punch some holes in the pencil marks. This is where the needle and thread will pass through. So, call me crazy, or maybe this is just a stupid idea, or hopefully this is genius and will work perfectly. So I don't have anything that is close to a sewing jig for bookbinding, or I don't have a chair that has a perfect backing that can work as a sewing jig for sewing all of these pages together. Since it's colder outside, I have actually brought in my plants that were out on the balcony, and one of those parts are actually the planters or plant boxes that I made. I realized that these legs might actually be perfect as a sewing jig for this, hopefully. Maybe not. We'll have to see. Hopefully it will work. The thread I'm using is waxed linen thread, and the needle is a blunt needle for saddle stitching. Now I don't have any jute cord at home, but I do have these thicker macrame threads, and I felt that they were going to do the work just perfectly. And it was time to just start sewing each page together. I'm not going to go into full detail about how to do these stitches, because there are others on YouTube that has done full tutorials on how to do this. But one thing I will mention is the fact that I'm not using signatures when I'm doing these pages. These are single pages, because these papers that I'm using are so thick that it was going to be too bulky if I had many pages inside of each other. So I decided to sew each page separately to the book. Now, I don't have any book press at home, so I decided to just put as many heavy stuff as I could on top of the pages that I had recently sewn, because now I'm going to add some glue to the spine of the book. And I'm going to use Mod Podge, but you can use any PVA glue that you have at hand. And I'm just going to paint on as much PVA glue as possible to the spine, so it will have a hard, strong surface that will keep the stitches in place and keep the pages strong and lower the risk of them getting damaged. Now I'm going to add a tiny strand of PVA glue to the free page of the end pages. Then it's time to add the ornament headband, and I don't have any thick leather band or leather cord for this, so I decided to cut out some leather and then just twist it around so it would get sort of a rounded shape, then use the thread to loop around the leather cord. It gave me the effect that I was going for and still got that kind of decorative headband to the book cover, so it did its job perfectly, even though I had to be a little bit creative and create something on my own. Then I decided to brush out the excess macrame cord that I had, because they were going to be glued onto the cardboard pages that is going to be the front and the back cover of the book. To finish off the spine, I'm going to use some canvas fabric. You can also use some kind of linen fabric. This was the only thing that I had at hand, so I'm just going to first add glue to the spine, and then attach the canvas fabric, and then add another layer of glue to make sure that the fabric will glue into place. Now remember the cardboard pieces from earlier? I had to make some new ones actually, because these were too small. I needed cardboard covers that were bigger than the book. But I'm not going to throw these pieces away that I cut out earlier. I'm going to put them into good use and create something magical with them. So just lean back and watch the magic happen. As you can see, I decided to create a relief effect to the book cover, meaning a 3D raised effect on the frame that is going around the design that I'm going to add later. So I decided to just glue this cardboard piece on top of the other cardboard piece using PVA glue, and then cover it with some Mod Podge just to have a protective finish and surface on top of the cardboard. Then it was time to glue the macrame cord onto the cardboard piece, and to protect the other papers underneath, I'm just using a parchment paper in between the cardboard and the end pages to make sure that they won't get any glue. Now comes the fun part, the leatherwork, and we're going to create a really cool design now to this book cover. So first of all, I'm going to cut out some 2 to 3 ounce vegetable tanned goatskin leather. As you can see, I'm marking out how much leather I need to go around the book, but I'm also cutting out an inch extra all the way around to make sure that I have some extra leather to be able to fold around the edges of the book. And even though this is thin leather, I still feel that the edges are a little bit too thick, so I'm going to use a leather scythe to thin down the edges so they're going to give a nicer finish when I'm folding them over the edges. So first I'm going to do the wet molding on the spine. So I'm going to spray some water mixed in with a little bit of dishwash so I can easily shape it onto the spine of the book cover and make sure that it gets the perfect fit. And then I can add a little bit of PVA glue to the inside of the leather where the spine is going to be on the book cover. And then I attach the book and add a little bit more water so I can wet mold or wet shape the leather more. And then I start to clamp the leather down and use some cardboard pieces and some waxed linen thread and just go as tight as possible around the spine where the cords were so it would enhance that look. Now during the time that the book cover has been clamped down with some waxed linen thread and the cardboard pieces, I decided to add some design to the spine. The reason why I'm doing this now instead of earlier is because it's a little bit hard to add details and make sure that they line up perfectly before you have attached it to the book. That's why it's easier for me to do it now after I have glued it down to the spine. And as you can see, I'm just using some transfer paper that has a little bit of graphite pencil on it, and then I transfer the design and then start playing around with some leather tools like this swivel knife and some of the modeling tools for leather tooling or figure carving, and then just add the details that I feel look the best and enhance more of that 3D effect or more of a raised relief leather tool effect. Now we can finally remove the thread and the cardboard pieces that have been clamped down and start working on the design on the front and the back of the book cover. So I'm going to do the wet molding effect again, just to make sure that the leather stays in place when I'm going to glue it down later. And you can see here that I'm using a leather burnishing tools to really make sure that the leather is getting into all of the corners and especially in the front cover where I have this kind of raised effect with the extra layer of cardboard. So I'm going between the burnishing tool and now some modeling tools just to enhance and get a more crisp, sharper edge details to the raised frame. Then it was time to glue down the leather to the front and the back of the book cover. And this is just to make sure that the leather stays in place before I start to add the leather tooling design. Now to transfer the leather design onto the leather, I'm going to use a ruler and one of these smaller nail dotting tools that is perfect for creating these crisp, sharp lines, especially these diamond patterns that I have here. And then I have the basic details of the entire design transferred to the leather so I can start with the actual leather tooling process. And using a smaller nail dotting tool, I'm going to create sort of a scale pattern to this X part that I have here. And it's not 100% like a snake scale pattern, I just did something random, but I just wanted to play around and add some textures. And then I'm just using some of the spoon shape tools that I have to create some raised undercuts and a little bit more depth and rounding off some edges. Add as much 3D or depth, whatever I can do to make as much of this layering process as I possibly can. And for the back side, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to glue the leather down, and then I'm going to add the leather design. First wet down the leather so it's going to be easier to carve into the leather, and then just transfer the design onto the leather piece. Now this is going to be the back side, so I'm just going to do a simple pattern here, and this time I'm using the swivel knife to cut down the edges, and then I'm going over with the nail dotting tool in the details in the center. And I'm getting pretty tired of all of this leather carving or leather tooling, so let's just do some magic and be done with it. And maybe we should do that one more time and add some scales to the spine of the book cover. Before we're moving on to the next step, I'm just going to trim down the edge of the spine of the book cover. Now it's finally time to add some color to this leather piece, and I'm going to use this gorgeous deep green shade of leather dye, and I'm first spraying down the leather with some water because it's going to help distribute it much easier, and then I'm just going to use a sponge and apply the leather dye to the book cover. Now I'm just going to trim down the edges a little bit more and then use a little bit of water, so it's going to be much easier for me to bend the leather around the edges of the book cover. And then I'm just using a little bit of contact adhesive, press down for a couple of seconds, and then the edges are glued in place. And I used the exact same process when I glued down the edge of the spine of the book cover. And as a final step to make sure that the book cover is 100% attached to the book, it's just to glue down the end page. Now that's obviously not the last part. This is the fun stuff. Start to decorate the front cover of the book. And I use some white and silver acrylics mixed in together, and you might notice that the paint looked very spotty and a little bit transparent. That's because the leather seemed to absorb some of the paint, so I had to go over like 2 or 3 times to get an opaque, vibrant finish. So have that in mind if you're going to paint your leather with some acrylics. Now this might be a little bit hard to tell, but the actual acrylics makes the design look very flat and a little bit monotone because it's just one shade of each part of the design. So I'm actually going to add some antique stain onto the book cover to bring back some of the details and the contrast and depth that I had before I added the acrylics. But before I'm going to add the antique stain, I'm first going to apply a shiny leather finish, which is going to be a protective surface before I apply the leather stain. So the leather finish I'm going to use here is the super sheen leather finish, which is going to leave a semi-glossy finish that you can actually buff to a more higher gloss finish if you would like. I added around 1 or 2 layers just to make sure that I have enough finish on the leather to protect all of the acrylics that I have applied so they won't actually get stained or removed when I'm going to apply the antique stain. So the antique finish I'm going to use is the antique stain by Phoebings, and it's the black one. Since all of the colors that I've used on the book cover are cool tone, I don't want to ruin the applications or the finish I already have on the book by adding something that is more warm tone like medium brown or dark brown. And since I have this leather finish that is going to make sure that the antique stain won't actually stain the leather, I can apply as much stain that I want and make sure that I really rub it into all of the details and the overall design. So I'm gonna leave the stain for approximately 15 minutes just to make sure that it has dried enough so when I'm going to wipe off the excess stain, it's only going to remove the stain that is on the higher surface, but the low lights or the details is going to be left with all of this black stain. After that, I let the antique stain dry overnight just to make sure that the stain was completely dry, and then I just went over with a gentle wash of the super sheen leather finish just to bring back the contrast and vibrancy and remove any of the excess stain that might still be in the surface of all the areas with the acrylic paint. And now to make the book look even more royal and fancy, I'm going to add some silver details. And I'm going to use this Sillver POSCA marker and a very tiny brush to paint on some tiny silver details to the design of the book cover. And I was first focusing on adding the silver paint on the letters on the center of the design. But then after a while when I had applied the silver, I really liked the effect that it gave. So I decided to add a little bit more silver to some other details. Not too much, but I just wanted to add a little bit more something when you move the book in different angles so it would have this silver shimmer or shine to it. And I also decided to add a little bit of silver to the spine of the book so it would have some contrast and a little bit extra. And then as a final step I added some of the silver around the raised details where the cardboard frame were attached. Then to make the book look even more fancy, I added some silver metal book corners to the front cover. And these ones were attached with some transparent leather glue, and I pressed it down for a couple of seconds. Sometimes I used a clamp if I felt that the piece was lifting a bit. Then I repeated the same step on each corner of the front cover. Here comes the part we've all been waiting for. Adding these Swarovski crystals, and these ones are some tiny emerald green Swarovski crystals that is going to make the book drown in sparkles when the light hits it. And that's how you make your own Slytherin spelltome. I hope you really enjoyed this video, got some ideas to maybe make your own in whatever style you would like. And let me know if you would be interested to see a series of these books where I create the remaining houses from Harry Potter. And also let me know if you want to see some other book being created here. With the recent release of Shadows of Rose from Resident Evil Village, I really got in the urge to create the Village of Shadows book. So let me know if that would be interesting, and I will definitely take my time to create that one. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next project, which is coming very soon.